Hi there, welcome to today's video where I'm going to be showing you how I make my interpretation of Arya Stark from Game of Thrones. I say Arya, I know that some characters pronounce her name quite differently. Arya, it's always a little tricky to know which, but I think Maisie Williams, who plays the character, prefers Arya herself, so I'm going for Arya today. And yep, she's another of my favourite female characters from television over the last year or two. Well, certainly a few years actually in the case of Game of Thrones, but I just wanted to return to it just for one more week before I move on to something a little different for next week. So let me go and show you how I make her. Right, so to start the project, I'm unusually going to start with the base, really because it's getting quite late in the day at the time of filming this. So it's just a bit easier really than trying to start getting a likeness on a face. So yeah, I'll start with the base, I think, in some nice earthy tones to represent Game of Thrones. I think so that I can talk quite freely about Game of Thrones and Arya, I'm just going to give a bit of a spoiler warning just in case I let anything slip really. So if you've yet to see Game of Thrones and you fancy watching it, it might be best to just pop me on mute and listen to some songs instead. Maybe a Song of Fire and Ice, the theme tune to Game of Thrones. And similarly, I've not got the best memory in the world, so if you are a Game of Thrones fan and I get something wrong, it's going to be no great surprise. Certainly to me anyway. I've only seen the show once in its entirety, so I no doubt can't remember a whole lot about it because there's all sorts happening at any one time, and I'm just grateful that I watched it alongside Ian because he's got quite a good memory with this kind of stuff, so so yeah, it was very useful for me. But I really wanted to return to strong female characters in television just for one more week. Well, actually there's a few others that I'd like to do too, but perhaps I'll return to those a little later in the year. But for today, I'm obviously making Arya, played by Maisie Williams, who's a great actor, I think. She's done a great job with this character. She's made Arya so believable and likeable, actually, as a character, and that's sort of no mean feat, really. There were a few female characters actually that I was thinking of for Game of Thrones. Obviously Daenerys is utterly amazing, and I'd really like to work with her hair at some point. Brienne was one that I was really close to choosing for this video. I think she'd be a great clay disarray make at some point. Who else was there? Cersei, although she was a kind of love-hate character, I think she was just so memorable throughout the TV show. You know, she'd be another great character to maybe return to at some points. Also, Missandei would look amazing, I think, as a clay disarray model. Maybe Sansa too, but yeah, I think Arya was definitely the number one for me. She's a really unique character. And again, she doesn't really rely on any tropes around female characters, so it's really quite refreshing when you get a really kind of strong female character pop up in a TV show. So yeah, I was really drawn to making her. So here I'm just working on her face, and this is definitely the most tricky parts of working on a model. This took around 2 hours for me to do, which is quite a long time for me, but I was really keen to try and nail the likeness on this one. And before I move any further, I'm just doing like a rudimentary hair test here, which is always a useful thing to do. Really to try and envisage what the overall character will look like before I move on. Really to make sure that it's worth it. So yep, pretty happy with that. And here's another test with some eyebrows, and yeah, I'm pretty convinced I've captured Arya Stark, thankfully. So now I can move on to adding her head to her body. So I'm going to give you some facts about Maisie Williams, who plays Arya Stark, and she was only 12 years old when she started playing the character, which is kind of unbelievable really. Imagine growing up with Game of Thrones. Yeah, that'd be quite weird and wonderful in all sorts of different ways, I imagine. And interestingly, there is a lot of debate around the character's name. I've definitely seen different characters, and you know, I wouldn't remember who they are now, but they've definitely pronounced her name differently in the show, so I've felt a bit confused by it. But George R.R. Martin, who wrote the Game of Thrones books, says that the proper pronunciation for her name is 2 syllables, so Arya. However, most people pronounce it with 3 syllables, like the musical term aria, so you know, both are right really. I think I prefer Arya actually over Arya, but as Maisie likes Arya, I'm just going to call her Arya for the purposes of this video. Maisie's real name is Margaret Constance, and she prefers the name Maisie, which is the name of her favourite character from the comic strip The Perishers. Gosh, I've not thought about The Perishers in a long time. I really loved it as I was growing up, but it's certainly not a cartoon that's been on in recent years really. But it's the one with the dog, isn't it? I definitely really enjoyed that as a kid, so it's nice that to think that Maisie's enjoyed it too. So here I'm just working on her leather top. It must have been quite difficult for her to do all of her fighting and action scenes with this outfit on. It's certainly not the easiest thing to run around in, I'm sure. So Arya had loads of different storylines throughout Game of Thrones, and it's really difficult to remember them all. But certainly a few of my favourite moments were spent with the Hound, I think. She had a really great relationship with the Hound, and certainly a love and hate one, I'd say. Oh, the Hound would be a great character to make at some point as well. Gosh, there's so many to choose. But for me, I think the main reason that I wanted to work with Arya Stark for this video is that, well, basically I think she should be sat on the Iron Throne really. Surely there's no greater accolade or greater feat than killing the Night King. Just seemed a bit strange how Bran was a chosen one really, but for me she's the winner, hence why I've chosen her this week. And here's her iconic sword, Little Needle. But because I work in polymer clay, I can't really make it too thin because I don't want the clay to break or crack while baking, so it's actually a little thicker than I'd like. But you know, it's all about compromise with colours polymer clay. And I'll just give her some leather gloves here as well. So interestingly, Maisie's mum, she read the Game of Thrones books before Maisie was formally cast, I think, in the show, and she found out that Arya is actually left-handed. So Maisie, being right-handed, decided to take it upon herself to teach herself really to be ambidextrous, I guess, in learning how to handle a sword with her left hand. It's really convincing actually. I think there's a really well-known practice fight scene with Arya and Lady Brienne of Tarth. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube. It's an amazing scene, considering it's just a practice scene as well. They're both so nimble and they look like natural swordsmiths really. So yeah, that's really amazing to think that's not her natural hands that she's doing that with, so good on her. And just moving on to her hair now. And hair can take ages to do. I know it looks really simple. Yeah, it certainly took me a few hours to get her hair right. Oh, I've just thought, if you've not watched my recent videos, I've got a broken finger at the moment, so that explains the splints on my finger, and I seem to be managing okay with it, thankfully. So there, I can definitely see Maisie's face there. If you're new to my channel, my name's Lizzie and I'm a polymer clay artist and illustrator, and I make weekly videos about my polymer clay sculptures such as Arya here, so if you like what you see, go and hit that subscribe button. And here she is, all done, and needless to say, I'm really pleased with this one. And here's a polymer poster or a fan art poster for Game of Thrones as well. Hope you enjoyed that. Please give it a thumbs up if you liked it, and I'll see you next week for something a little different. Take care, bye bye.